Peyton. Nice to see you again. Welcome at our World of Ideas podcast. And this week we want to talk about two quotes, actually. One is from Marcus Aurelius, which states, "Your soul gets dyed in the colors of your thoughts." Like the connection between thoughts and what you feel and how you experience the world. And the other quote is from the Buddha, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, and he says, that which we frequently ponder upon becomes the inclination of our mind. So, very similar idea in just a little different way of phrasing it. And
Yeah.
excited to talk about this. These are concepts that I think are extremely useful to remember for all of us, but they're not commonly talked about. Even though we're all spending our entire life living in between our ears, talking to ourselves in our head, walking around thinking various thoughts, and then having our subjective experience of positive or negative emotion largely ruled by the content in the character of these thoughts. Many people don't think or talk about thoughts as if there's something to be intentional about. And oftentimes, thoughts are thought of as something that happens to us, which of course is true to an extent. We can't control the sound that pops into our head. We can't control the thing that arises within awareness. But what we can control is how we respond to the thoughts that do arise within awareness. When something occurs to us, we have many, many subtle choices in our days and weeks that oftentimes don't fully register to us as choices, which is something along the lines of, when this thought arises to me, am I seeing it and noticing it and seeing that, okay, this is a dead end. This isn't somewhere I want to go. Or are we hopping right on that ride and riding it for as long as it takes us and having this thought repeat and play on loop in our mind? And are we turning this up? Are we associating with it? Are we identifying with it? And telling ourselves a larger and larger story and acting on the basis of this thought. And so this is a core practice that it becomes invisible to many of us, myself included, that the character of our thoughts is causal. It does play perhaps the largest role in what our experience is like on this earth. And the Stoics and the Buddhists, both of whom had this project of living a good life and being free of suffering, both talked about this exact same phenomenon ad nauseum in their own ways, kind of to fit their own culture, Eastern or Western.
Definitely. I'm always fascinated about the similarity between the thoughts of the Buddha and the teachings of the Stoa. Like all these people who looked into the world, experienced it for themselves, and then found some principles they derived from their experiencing the world in a different way when they had different kinds of thoughts and different patterns in which they thought about the world. And in this sense, focus on the becoming, because you color your soul in the way you think about it. You can shape the filter through which you perceive the world. And I think about it like a system from the engineer's perspective. A system which is in constant flux and always changing, like a complex system and adaptive through the inputs you give it, and therefore differentiating the outputs as well. And the similarity between a river occurs to me because the river is in constant flux. The river behind me always flows and it always changes the way it flows. The same way the brain is made. The brain always changes. It's the center of the control system of our brain, of our life, is our brain. And it becomes the way we use it with high intention, high impact, and high regularity. It becomes the way we use it. And these things always fascinate me. The brain becomes the way you use it. Your world and your perception becomes the way you frequently perceive, and with high impact you perceive, is always a fascination to me.
Yeah, it is so true that the world is perceived through the filter of our brain and through the filter of our thoughts. When we look, we don't actually have, like when we're using our visual field, for example, we don't actually have photons traveling directly through our eyeballs straight into our brain where they like project on a screen back here and we observe the world, quote unquote, as it is. What happens is they hit the back of the retina and it causes electrical signals to fire off and shoot around in different places within our brain. And up to 40% of our visual field, or up to 40% of our brain is implicated in this process of vision. But it's neurons firing its electrical signals. It's not the world as it is. And so when we perceive, and all of our senses are this way, when we perceive things out in the world, many times we have this assumption that we just perceive, quote unquote, reality as it is. But the truth is, and this can be seen more and more clearly through inspection and introspection, is that yes, we do have our senses. Yes, there are things that arise in this field of our visual, auditory, sensory experience as Homo sapiens, or in general, there's objects out there that seem to register with certain phenomena in consciousness, but they're mediated through a mind that is totally plastic and largely shaped through our thoughts, our concepts, our map of the territory, our experience. And you can notice this, for example, when you visit a city for the first time. Let's say you're going and checking a place out before you move there for some reason, or before it becomes familiar to you in one way or another. And in some way, when you're walking around there in this exploration mode, when it's novel, you perceive it, you sense it, you receive it in a certain way. And subjectively, if you pay attention, you notice that that experience before you were familiar with this place is way different subjectively than after you've moved there and been walking around that neighborhood for 3 months. And all of a sudden, this store is not a novel sensory experience where there's a bit of figuring it out and you're noticing the shapes and colors for the first times, and it's registering this territory to you as you encounter it and explore it. Now you're interacting with this label that you have on it, this map. Oh yes, that is the corner store that I go to buy this. Oh yes, that is the apartment building where my friend Max lives. Oh yes, that is that one house with the tree that I like. There's a more surface level interaction that we have with many of the things that are in our lives, because oftentimes we're interacting with the familiar that is through this filter of our thoughts and our concepts. And this can be taken a step further when our brain itself is, to use the words of the Stoic, colored by certain thoughts. If we have certain negative associations with a place, then when we walk into that place, it will feel hostile to us. It will feel negative to us. Our visual field will go through this filter of thought, this filter of this negative map that we have labeled our surroundings with, or positive in certain ways that can be that too, that kind of impact the very perceptions that we're experiencing, our very base experience, the way that we walk through the world and the way that the world actually seems and appears to us, because it runs through this filter of negative associations and thoughts. And this whole colors the mind, this whole inclination of the mind is also a totally legitimate scientific phenomenon. Even before they understood what neurons were and how this shit worked, they understood it just from watching it empirically in practice, that if you think about something, if you ruminate about it over and over and over and over and over, these connections between different neurons in your brain, this, for example, earlier this week, I was telling you that I was in a bit of a loop of self-concern, not something that I'm proud about, but some aspect had me kind of ruminating and worried about how I appeared in some way. And in my brain, when this was going on, there is almost an implied thought or an implied logic under the surface that I should think about this to quote unquote get to the bottom of it or something like that. When clearly that's not the nature of the situation. Like, I'm just thinking about this, and nothing good or useful is going to come from self-consciousness, self-concern over, especially over some appearance-based thing. It's completely fruitless. But if I spend more and more time thinking about this, if I let this thought run rampant in my mind, not just am I being miserable and contracted during that brief amount of time that this is walking across, but neurons that fire together wire together. When we think about things over and over, many times our thoughts are repetitive because these are neural pathways within our mind. Once these electrical signals get sent back and forth in certain areas of the mind, certain associations begin to become very natural. almost like when you're, say, skiing down a hill over and over and over, and there's these grooves that no matter where you start, eventually you collide with these ruts and you slide into them, and then you're cruising down these grooves all the way down. The brain and the neurons are obviously it's not the same shape or exact mechanisms or whatever, but the logic is fairly similar. It's a useful analogy that when we're thinking about things that are causing us to suffer, first of all, we can't help the things that pop into our minds. So no point in kind of beating ourselves up over what emerges originally in consciousness. But where we do have a bit of agency is, are we going to get on this ride and follow it wherever it goes for as long as it goes and trust this siren song of thought and rumination that says, oh yeah, you better get to the bottom of this, quote unquote. You better think all the way through it. You better get through this, and you better understand, quote unquote, this where this train of thought is going. These are a lot of times empty promises that we don't end up turning back and holding accountable and like, oh, I just wasted an hour of my time on that. And many times we're not actually inspecting when we're wasting our time. And after we waste this time, the pernicious aspect of it is we have just trained our mind to slip right back into this groove. And so this repetitive thought, a reason why a lot of people are plagued by the same thoughts over and over and over, day after day, week after week after week, and a lot of people are suffering within their own minds. Once again, I'm not above this. This is something that I'm really working through myself even right now with various things, and I've kind of gone up and down on this roller coaster many times. This is a real thing. This is something that we are ramping up and then training ourselves to do. And so it does oftentimes take some intentionality to kind of get off this ride. And it's a useful thing to understand that the next time you're seeing something that comes up within your mind that is causing you to feel contracted, self-concerned, or ruminative, worried, angry for sure, fearful, a lot of these things, if there's no action to be taken right now, if there isn't an answer to find right now, then many times we're accidentally training our minds to suffer. We're coloring our minds with the shade of contraction and rumination and self-concern and suffering ultimately. And there is some agency we have to get off the ride of these thoughts, but it definitely is not something that society is reminding us to do. It definitely is not something that comes naturally to us. This is something that requires intentionality. This is something that requires awareness and tapping into our deeper source, our consciousness, our awareness, our soul, in order to have something that's more powerful and can rise above a lot of these conditioned habits of the mind that arise from how we exist in relation to other people and within our culture, and due to just the nature and nurture of our little craniums.
Man, nice thoughts, yeah. And similar thing is when you experience the world, you can try out a little practice and exercise, and that served me well this weekend, which I tried out. It was looking in the way, looking in the world with thoughts of gratefulness. Like,
Mm,
try to view everything which enters your visual field with some kind of gratitude and some kind of connection. And if you connect this way, you use your brain and you wire it with the visual input in a way which also leaves you changed. It leaves you a different person. If you do it over and over again, if you do it with high intensity, especially in nature, when you go into the woods or you go to a river where the nature is full of juice and the information is flowing and it grows, everything grows and flows. Looking in a way into the world like this is totally rewarding. Also changes the way you are. Like through your work and through your practice, you change the way you are. Through the way you are in the world and perceive the things you perceive, you change yourself as well, again, because everything is flowing, everything is in a flux. And again, neurons that fire together, wire together. So if you make yourself aware of the thoughts you have in the situations and times you are, and you lift it from the unconsciousness into the conscious mind. If you do this, then it makes you more aware of your thoughts, and therefore it also makes you more aware of the trajectory your change is on the way to be going to. You change the way how you habitually behave through awareness, through raising your awareness, through coloring your thoughts in a more beautiful way. And therefore, another useful practice is to cut down on the negative stuff. Because if you put yourself down, if you put yourself down, then you end up in a place and a level lower than you have been previously. But everything beautiful that comes along only has this level of energy left of yours. So just don't put yourself down so you have more energy to find the better opportunities and to make something out of them, to live the way you want to live, to use everything to thrive, not just to survive, and therefore live a more beautiful and meaningful existence, because you do the heavy lifting of putting the unconscious stuff and thoughts into your consciousness, and therefore changing the trajectory your life goes, because you change the way you think about the world, and therefore you change the way you see opportunities, you change the way you act in the world, and therefore you change your whole way of being.
Absolutely. And this is something that's definitely not natural for me, definitely not natural for many. On some level, I think with many of us, there's this part of our mind that feels like we should be self-critical and we should be finding ways to tear ourselves down, almost as if it's the responsible thing to do to ruminate, as if, oh yeah, I shouldn't be just relaxing right now. I should be contemplating and thinking and thinking and thinking about myself, thinking about past and future interactions or conversations with others or risks and opportunities or things that I could be better about, and self criticism in this way or that. And our mind tells us this very alluring story about how this is the quote unquote right thing to do, or this is the quote unquote moral thing to do, or whatever, to speak negatively to ourselves. It has this implied self-righteous implication, and that this is just the responsible line of action, especially when we have some degree of responsibility paired with some degree of risk. This is very, very common. I see this in all kinds of situations in myself and in others. And in reality, the responsible thing to do, or the best thing that we can do for others, is to have as healthy of a mind as possible, as free of a mind as possible, a mind that can accept the outrage of others, the outpourings of others, the difficult emotions and situations of others, without ourself being threatened and defensive and implicated and in this battle to compare ourselves to others and blah blah blah. The becoming free and actually being aware of our thoughts in a way that allows us to ride these waves more smoothly enables us to have a greater capacity to be better for other people, to be better for ourselves, not just happier, but also to be a fuller, more present, higher capacity friend and confidant and helper and advisor for those that we care about. And this logic is not baked into at least my natural conditioning, and it doesn't seem to be baked into others. And so it falls on us to bring a degree of intentionality to our thoughts, a degree of intentionality to our mindsets, understanding their power, not just in terms of the traps that they can bring us in, the repetitive thoughts and negative emotions, wiring together, firing together, coloring our perceptions in a dark way, but also our capacity to notice these things that arise, see the logic of this game that's playing out before us, and wisely, with a connection to a deeper awareness, step off the ride and more within our lives. Obviously, we'll never be perfect, but bring small points of mindfulness and intentionality toward our mindsets, and a strong intention toward being free, ultimately, toward not suffering, toward not being trapped in the contractions of the sense of self. And that's a project that I definitely have a long way to go on. I plan to reflect on that much more today and throughout this week, but I'm very grateful for many of these teachings, and for you as a an advisor as I try to walk this path and continue to take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and try to bring in awareness and a healthier mindset to my life. So I appreciate you very much, man. Really enjoyed talking through these things
You
with
too,
you.
man.
Thank you for your advice. And
Thank you
yeah, I
for
wish you
yours,
a very
man.
great week. And may your thoughts and minds be colored with beneficial, positive, and free thoughts rather than with contraction.
Yeah, man. May you be peaceful, well, and happy as well. And as always, thank you as well for your advice, man. I really much appreciate this back and forth, sharing our ideas, sharing our advice, and trying to raise our negative capabilities to be in a stronger position to go on and trying to use the beautiful opportunities of new ideas, of old ideas in a new way. And thanks for everything, man. See you next week.
Yeah, appreciate you, man. I'll see you next week.
Appreciate
Take
you.
care.
Bye. Beautiful man.
All right. That was great.